Acolyte has pushed the limits of Star Wars, but has it gone too far? Welcome to Star Wars Uplink. Star Wars Acolyte was a lot of ups and downs for me. There are moments that I truly and just utterly enjoyed outside of anything, whether or not it is Star Wars, like those fight scenes were incredible. And then there's other things like the actual story structure and the character arcs that are being set up here where I question them deeply. I do have many criticisms with Star Wars Acolyte's story. I think Leslie Headland and the team create interesting characters, and I think the variety of the interesting characters is actually one of the failings that the show has. It's like it honestly went too far with too many characters and not enough focus, and the story itself didn't actually give enough time to many of the threads that they were trying to weave into the story. But that's besides the point. Today I want to talk about the idea of whether or not Star Wars Acolyte is real Star Wars. Now, this is a very hot topic, and it's a very controversial topic because Star Wars is many things. Star Wars is comics, Star Wars is video games, Star Wars is books, Star Wars is TV, Star Wars is movies, Star Wars is a big melting pot right now. Star Wars is experimenting with various ideas across the galaxy, testing to see how far they can push the brand of Star Wars. But with Star Wars Acolyte, have they actually pushed it too far away from what we consider to be Star Wars? First off, though, we need to break down what is Star Wars, because you can say, yeah, this isn't Star Wars, and I think you really can make an argument, and I think many would make an argument that Star Wars isn't without George Lucas. Star Wars, for many fans, and in many ways, is George Lucas. When you really look at it, Star Wars and the original works can only be from the original creator in many senses of the word. The rest of it is interpretations of one person's work and version of the world that they've built. And basically anything else is, in all intents and purposes, fan fiction. Truly and utterly fan fiction. It doesn't really matter if it was created by the studio that owns the rights to it. Really and truly, Star Wars is just whatever George Lucas creates. Everything else is just set in the universe of Star Wars and utilizing the characters of Star Wars and are basically fan fiction. But if we go a layer deeper in this idea, if we take this idea of Star Wars as we know it, the themes of Star Wars, the inspirations of Star Wars, what Star Wars was originally intending to tell, the story, the thing it wanted to say, Star Wars is a story of hope and small individual people gathering together to make big waves and impacts in the galaxy. It was speaking on the idea of colonialism. It was a statement against the Vietnam War, and it, in many ways, had very similar themes to what George Lucas valued, which was heavily inspired and in many ways structured in the way of Joseph Campbell and the Hero of a Thousand Faces. That is the foundation of Star Wars. And when you look at what Star Wars is, and if you look at the ideas that inspired Star Wars and what Star Wars was intending to say originally, and if we go back to Acolyte, I think in many ways Star Wars Acolyte isn't what Star Wars was created to say. In many ways, it is the evolution of what Star Wars was intended to say. It is a very cynical view of what Star Wars story and the things that it wanted to say, of like small people making big impacts. In Star Wars The Acolyte, small people make huge impacts in ways that we do not see. Well, in the original trilogy, we see these characters that are small in the galaxy make huge impacts in the positive sense, at least if you're in the perspective of the rebellion. In Star Wars Acolyte, those small people making big differences make them in the negative way. So in a lot of ways, Star Wars Acolyte is actually the inverse of what Star Wars was originally intended to say. And if we look at the hope aspect, because Star Wars is and always will be, or should be, a story of hope and redemption and progress from very flawed characters into something even more powerful, and really showcasing the depth of human emotion. If we look at that, and we look at Star Wars Acolyte, there are actually many instances of hope in this story. The moments of hope really take a left turn from what we're typically looking at. If you look at like May and Osha as characters, their motivations are... they're hard to really nail down, because May wanted to continue the path that she had with her family, while Osha wanted to separate from the family, do something for herself in a way that fulfilled her own desires. She had hope that she wanted to be a Jedi. She wanted to be a part of what she took as more than what she was born for. And then later on, May had hope that Osha was still alive in some form, or at least was carrying her memory to fulfill the goals that she had of vengeance in the galaxy. Now, this is something that we don't typically see. Hope is usually from the perspective of the light side in Star Wars. It's the symbol of the rebellion, or the Jedi, something of peace and justice, and hope for something better in the future, and working to make that thing better in the future. Now, where it gets a little bit different is we are seeing this perspective from originally, I wouldn't say either good guys or bad guys per se. We're seeing this from a neutral perspective of May and Osha, who have no real tie-ins to the light side or the dark side. They are just part of the coven or the sisterhood that is just using the thread, their version of the Force or an iteration of the Force, to fulfill their own beliefs. There is no good side or light side or bad side or dark side. It is just the thread. Now, if you go to Kamir or the Stranger, his hope is from the dark side Sith perspective. He hopes to find an acolyte, someone that he can trust and train in the ways of the Sith, and to fulfill his dreams of becoming the Sith Master. And I think if you want to speculate even more on the hope aspect, you can go all the way to Plagueis, who hopes to find ways of continuing his lifespan, find ways of living forever. So yeah, Star Wars Acolyte has a variety of things that you would say, oh yeah, that's Star Wars. And on the other hand, it steps away from what we would traditionally say is Star Wars. If we look at the core belief of Joseph Campbell in Star Wars, George Lucas being an acolyte of Joseph Campbell in all senses of the word, taking inspiration, heavy inspiration from the story structure and beliefs that Joseph Campbell had within story and storytelling. I don't think Star Wars Acolyte is Star Wars. It's pushing the limits in many ways, and I would question a lot of the beliefs of the Force, I think, is where Star Wars Acolyte fails the most. The Force is this very black or white thing in Star Wars. You use the dark side, you will be corrupted, whether it's now or later. It's not a question of if, it is a question of when. And if you look at the Sith and the dark side in Star Wars, it's kind of antithetical to the belief that Kamir can find happiness or can find an acolyte in the way that is currently set up of like an enemies to lovers type story. Everything about that relationship has to be toxic because of the way that the Sith works. And maybe that's something they actually tie into. I think Acolyte Season 1, and if there is a Season 2, excellent. But I think Acolyte, the season that we got, is a very interesting case study because they understand Star Wars lore and the impacts of changing lore very deeply. They understand the ways and the impacts of the things that they do here and how it actually changes into the future. They actually do that very well, I would say. So when we look at that idea of like enemies to lovers and the perspective of the Sith and the dark side, maybe that's something to actually play around with. But I think we're getting a very different type of story in the Acolyte. And in many ways, it's one that I enjoy, and in many other ways, it's one that I do not enjoy. So it's a mixed bag for me, but I think Star Wars Acolyte in many ways is Star Wars, and I think Star Wars Acolyte in many ways isn't Star Wars. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of this idea and story and theory? Let me know in the comments below. Check out our podcast, and may the Force be with you.